right?
Yes.
You can start.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hope you are feeling well under this critical time and critical condition. Forgive me because I insisted on to present today just in English language because I need to avoid the interruption of my ideas. I need to be sure that I will convey the message as I understand. So forgive me for being insisted to make it in English today. Second, I will not repeat everything that I presented before. I tried to renew my slides by adding some new slides and modify some of the previous ones. So we start the journey of the well testing by asking the question, what is well testing? Well testing, as we said before, just we have three main parameters. Rate, that action will be taken at the surface. During the time, we are going to record the pressure response that coming from the gauge sitting down in the wellbore. In return of what? Why we are doing this? Why is well testing important? Because we are interested to know the initial reservoir pressure, which will be the key for the future calculations for either production engineer, reservoir engineers. We need to identify the permeability, or let us say that petrophysical characteristics of a reservoir. Permeability, we cannot measure it, but however, from well test, we can estimate it. The third one is wellbore damage. We need to identify if we have already a skin as a result of drilling or things like that. Of course, we know that skin has bad effect on the productivity of the well in the future. So here we go. The rate at surface is related to your own facilities. You have your own test separator or whatever, so you are aware about the accuracy of numbers coming from the surface. The time, which is the second factor, during the well test, you are supposed to record everything. All the events that going on during the well test should be recorded. Name, duration, and so on. Why? Because the pressure response, it will respond to anything that will happen. It will be clear and obvious in terms of the pressure response. We have downhole gauges that highly sensitive, that take notes of every action that you can take. Why? In the later on, when you are moving onward to the step of well test interpretation, if you have pressure anomalies, if you have something that is difficult for you to justify or to interpret, you have to find out the report and check exactly what happened at that time. So it can help you to identify the reasons for such anomalies in the pressure trend. If everything will go smooth, the interpretation process will be easy as well. Here is a sketch for the surface separator, and this one is the downhole gauge. We have two types of gauges. The first one is a memory gauge that we can set it for a duration period of time that record the pressure. After that, we extract it and we dump all the details. We start the process of analysis. And the second one, which is the most usable one, is SRO. SRO standing for surface readout. That means we are able to see the pressure values on time during the test period itself. We will not wait until we extract the downhole gauge, then we start the analysis process. So now, from now on, all companies already are using only SRO. The basic concept for well test analysis, we are dealing with unknown reservoir for us, but we are aware about the input action, which is variation in rate at surface, either put the well on production for flowing or shut the well in. The outcome is, in terms of pressure response, is known as well. That means the two ends are known for us. And what is unknown is the reservoir parameters. And this is why we are using the software package we have without giving a name, but we are creating analytical model. We identify some parameters and consider assumptions in this analytical model based on the available information we have. Then to run the model and compare the outcome pressure response with the action and compare it together with the real one until we have a good match. Once we have this good match, it will indicate that parameters we considered in this model are representing the real ones in our unknown reservoir. This is the main concept for the well test. We have three types of wells. We have exploratory well, appraisal well, and the development well. This well test is always mandatory either for exploratory well or appraisal well. We cannot drill exploratory well without testing it. Why? Because the information will help us to move from exploratory phase to the appraisal phase. And the same, testing an appraisal well will help us to answer some questions and to move from appraisal phase to the development phase. Here are the list of some of the objectives of well testing. In case of exploration well, which is the initial well, we need to answer an important question. Are there hydrocarbon in the reservoir? We need also to be aware about the prediction of the first production and the future forecast, the nature of the fluid that we are going to produce, information about reservoir properties, and finally, which is the major one, the initial reservoir pressure. For the appraisal well, we need to refine the previous interpretation coming from the exploration well. And to answer another important question, what types of hydrocarbon? Do we have extension for the reservoir? Do we have a compartmentalization? Do our reservoir is segmented? So all these questions and how to, this appraisal well will help us to delineate the boundaries of the reservoir we have. It will give us the opportunity to collect a fluid sample for PVT study, which is mandatory, the backbone for 3D modeling. The test can be longer than the first test, and BI can be evaluated in a proper way. The last one for development wells, which already wells on production, and we are performing this sort of test just to double check if we have performed acidization or fracturing or whatever. We can analyze the impact of this remedial job and compare the previous productivity index with the new productivity index. And finally, we can estimate the average reservoir pressure. We used to make an update for our reservoir model, and there is always a fresh database every 6 months in terms of pressure and production to update your model and to estimate the future prediction forecast. Types of well tests. How many types do we have? We have 3 types. One of them is the drill stem test, which is one of the oldest tests we have, is no longer used anymore because it can consume a lot of time and also it can create some troubles. It is used to be part of the drill pipe during the test. However, the first and the third one are still going on until today. Number one is the wireline formation tester, and this is normal practice that we used to run before setting the production casing to take a small fluid sample and take pressure points. From the open hole logs, we identify number of points that we need to record pressure at those points. After that, we transfer this pressure at this depth to a datum. This pressure point, we consider it in our well test analysis later on. For production test, it can be split into 3 other types of test: periodic one, stabilized, and transient pressure. The periodic one, the one that we used to do it from time to time as a process, as a part of reservoir monitoring. The second one, stabilized or deliverability one, we take it to see the difference, because transient and stabilized, both of them are, somebody can be confused, because just only transient is relatively short in terms of duration. However, the stabilized one is longer in terms of duration. That means transient can be part of the stabilized. This, what can you understand, but is not like that exactly. The list of the tests that we have under transient test, like drawdown, build up, multi-rate, interference, Dresden test, which is already eliminated, and RFT. For stabilized ones, we have reservoir limit test, absolute open flow, and IPR. Target of transient test analysis, we are targeting reservoir characterization. However, in stabilized test, we are targeting the deliverability forecasting. Here we go. This just to make it easy. What is exactly the real difference between transient and stabilized? If you consider this black color here, circle, is representing the outer boundary. This outer boundary, during the transient, we didn't feel it. The pressure response is still representing the reservoir itself. This is why we call it infinite acting radial flow. The pressure response is coming from the reservoir itself. Still, we didn't hit the outer boundary. In the stabilized one, already the pressure response is reflecting the border we have, the reservoir boundaries we have. This equation is Darcy equation in gradient form. If you see here pressure with respect to radius, from this equation, it can estimate the pressure at any radius. So this is what we can use Darcy equation for. However, if we need to account for how quick this pressure wave or pressure response is moving across the reservoir, the answer is coming from the diffusivity equation, the pressure derivative with respect to time. This can answer how quick the pressure wave is moving across the reservoir. This is the list of the tests that can be conducted under the stabilized condition. And this is the list for transient ones. And we are going to focus on the first 2, drawdown test and build up test. These 2 are the most famous ones, and we can extract the valuable information that we are looking for related to the reservoir from these 2. And most of the analytical solutions for the diffusivity equation is based on drawdown and build up test. In the drawdown pressure test, we are supposed to put the well on production at constant rate for a period of time. During that, we are recording continuously the bottom hole flowing pressure response. What is difficult or the disadvantage of this test, it seems to be difficult from practical point of view, maintaining the flow at constant rate. along the history of the well. For the second one, the build-up test, it means the well was initially producing at rate Q. After that, shut the well in. Instead of producing at rate Q, the Q now becomes 0. The pressure will build up. The downhole gauge will record everything. And this pressure response, we consider it for the analysis. But what is the problem here? That all the analytical models solutions are considering that when the well was producing in the past, either from day number 1 or immediately before the pressure build up, the rate should be maintained constant, which is extremely difficult. To solve this problem, we have what we call superposition technique that can solve for this problem. A simple comparison to see the consideration between the two of them. Drawdown test is difficult to maintain constant rate, and the build-up test rate is well known because the wheel is shut in already, so Q is 0. So no doubt about this. Second, this drawdown test is unreliable due to number 1. However, build-up test is the most reliable one. The major disadvantage here that we don't have production losses in drawdown test. However, on the other side, we have production loss. So it's not easy to get approval to conduct a build-up test. And also when you perform this build-up test while the rig is still there in the location, the time is a factor, because if you consider the daily rate of the rig, you will be requested as a reservoir engineer to design a well test, and keep in mind that the shortest period that you can consider for the build-up, in the same time that it will be helping to extract the information we are looking for to avoid losing the entire test. We are going to discuss now the basic well test sequence. And the chart you are watching now is the identical one. As a rule of thumb, all the companies are following this because from analytical point of view is achieving the main goals, either from practical point of view or from analytical point of view. We can split this well test sequence into 4 main periods. The first period, we call it cleanup period. As you see here, the well is flowing at different choke sizes. It means at different rates. Pressure responding, drawdown, as you see. How long it will last, this cleanup? We can say that we don't have an exact duration number or figure for the cleanup. It depends on your observation there. If you feel that the sample you are collecting at the wellhead location, you continue taking fluid samples until the fluid is representing the formation fluid, and you already extracted or removed all the unwanted fluids from the wellbore. Mainly, I mean here the drilling fluid and completion fluid. The second factor that can help you to decide that the end of the cleanup is BS and W is to be less than 5%. The second period is representing what we call the initial shut-in. This initial shut-in, why initial? Because we have the initial and the final, first and second. This will be the main build-up at the end, and this will be the initial build-up after immediately following the cleanup. We have already the initial pressure from RFT, and we have here the first pressure coming from the downhole gauge. At the end of this initial build-up, we will compare this pressure here with the previous one to account for if there is any indication for pressure drop. Also, duration for this it can be the same like the clean-up period. If this one lasts 5 hours, this can be 5 hours as well.
Essam.
Yes?
Sorry, Essam. Yes, James Stenhouse here. Basically, your initial thoughts there on the BS&W during the cleanup. If based on the parameters of the water, if it was identified to be reservoir water, what would your steps be taken then?
So how can you be sure that this is reservoir water?
No, in terms of if we are sure due to salinity and due to on-site analysis that the BS&W was say around 40% water cut in terms of an oil well or a gas well is identified as reservoir fluids, what would be your progression then for the cleanup?
But in this case, it means in this case we have perforated in the water zone. And I guess when we perforate in the oil column where the water is immobile water there. So the only case that water is coming, in this case, either we have a channeling behind the casing or we perforated by mistakenly in a water zone.
So in those steps, you'd recommend a production logging tool to identify the water ingress route?
It depends on the availability. If the tool is available on location at this time, we can run it. I never met this situation before, to be honest with you.
Yes, we've encountered it a few times, especially on very explorational wells and multi-zone DSTs and on large perforation sections. So I was just wondering what, from your side on a reservoir engineering point of view, what would your steps be,
This is why we are very sure we need to be very sure before taking the decision of where we are going to perforate exactly. So
okay,
I'm not expecting a mobile water to come from the first minute in the production. It's difficult. But again, if we have the tool that can help us to identify from where this water is coming, it will be better, because I cannot conduct the test in this case. Before conducting the test, you need to identify first this water is coming and for how long it will continue. If it is formation water, it will not finish. So I cannot conduct the test in this case. Before, we have to modify the plan, like you said, finding out the proper tool and analyze and investigate. It's okay, we can continue?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thank
you.
You
are welcome. Okay. So now we start the main flow period. The main flow period that we put the well on production at variable rates at different choke sizes. But this period here, it can be split into 2 or 3. Having a look here, you can find that we have a major main flow period that provide stabilization in terms of rate, and before that we have two flowing periods. This one in terms of time, I'm talking about time, not choke size. So split from here to here is one time, from here to here another time, from here to here the last one. So consider that how many hours, if from 8 to 12 hours, it will be the step. This is the time for each step. So consider this 12 and this 12 and 8, sorry, it can be 20 hours in total. So the most important here is to create pressure pulse in the reservoir that will travel across the reservoir, and also for us to see the response of the well or the reservoir when we put it on production at different choke sizes. With keeping in mind that the last flowing period immediately before the main build-up should be the longer one to provide stabilization. Moving to the final and the most important one that will be considered for our analysis, the main build-up, which will last. It depends on how many hours you spend in the flowing period, you just multiply by 1.5 or 2 times to give you the timing for the build-up duration. The final pressure here, it's supposed to be, if we are dealing with an infinite acting radial reservoir, there will be no sharp drop between this final pressure point and the initial pressure point. However, if the reservoir is limited or bounded, there will be a gap between the final pressure point here and the final pressure point here and the initial point here. During the well test analysis, the pressure is coming from the downhole, and this pressure will be affected by many factors. One factor is the wellbore itself, which we call it wellbore storage. The other factor is the reservoir geometry. Reservoir geometry can affect the fluid behavior in the reservoir. So we have three main. In reality, there are more than this, but let's consider for the time being the three main flowing behavior that we have. We need to identify that will help us in the analysis process later on. The radial flow, linear flow, and the spherical flow. How can we identify the radial flow? If the well that we have drilled already entirely penetrates the formation, and we have completed the entire zone like that, it will guarantee that the streamlines will flow in parallel toward the wellbore in a radial form, in a radial circular form. These streamlines will converge in case of production and diverge in case of injection. Why radial flow regime is very important for us? Because all the, let us say that diffusivity equation has been solved considering radial flow and constant rate. Based on this, we have this final equation that can represent a relationship, can present a relationship between a logarithmic of time and the pressure, which is what we know as semi-log. So radial flow is very important for us again because it representing the response of the reservoir itself, not affected by boundaries or any other factors. The second one is the spherical flow regime. It can happen in two scenarios. If the well penetrated only the top part of the formation, or we just, instead of perforating the entire zone, we just perforated a small interval. In the both scenarios, what we are expecting that the streamlines will converge and will create a sort of turbulence that lead to a skin, or this skin will create pressure drop, which means damage by the end and affect the real productivity of the well. So how can we identify this spherical flow comparing to this radial flow? I will show you later in the next slide that this spherical flow can be seen in terms of on the derivative or log-log plot. It will be clear as a negative half slope trend. However, the radial flow, I forgot to tell you, it will be flat. It will be flat, horizontal. The third one is the linear flow regime. If we have already fracture, in case of fracture, the flow toward the wellbore will move like you see here in one direction, either from right to left or from left to right. Streamlines will be parallel to each other. And this flow regime is representing a linear flow. So we can easily distinguish between the three of them on the form of derivative plot. This one will be shown as a positive half slope. Move one step. This is the first one. The radial flow, as I told you, it will be horizontal. This tool, we call it FRED, Flow Regime Identification Tool. This based on the information and experience and the knowledge we have in the field of well-test analysis. For each flow regime, it can be identified by a certain trend. Like Wilbur storage here, it can be identified by a unit slope, but we will take it later on. But for the time being now, consider radial flow here, here, here. The second one is flowing through fracture, which is linear flow. As I said, is positive slope, half slope. And the last one is negative half slope. If we are able to distinguish between these three, that means, imagine that if I'm saying that the reservoir, the flow now in the reservoir is can be described as radial infinite acting radial flow, which flow regime we are expecting? It should be this or this or this. So I will take it in the reverse direction. From the pressure interpretation we have, if we see this trend here, it can help us that this trend is representing linear flow. However, this trend, the flat one, is representing radial flow, and this trend is representing spherical flow. This is why we are studying the flow regime and how can represent these flow regimes in terms of derivative. Derivative will be explained later. The question now, why radial flow? Radial flow regime is the only flow regime that we can directly determine reservoir permeability. If it is not radial flow regime, we cannot perform the analysis process. So, but permeability will not come absolutely as it is. No, the product we have, we call it permeability thickness product. Thickness already can be evaluated from the open hole logs. And after that, it will be easy to estimate permeability. This is why we are focusing and targeting radial flow regime. So radial flow regime will help us to estimate KH. Will open hole logs will estimate H. What is remaining is permeability. Why permeability is matter? Because we have a direct relationship. Higher permeability, higher production. The velocity of the pressure wave in the reservoir is a function of permeability, not function of the rate itself. The higher the permeability is, will be the faster the pressure front propagate. This is a derivative equation. This is a diffusivity equation. As you see here, the direct relationship between permeability and the derivative of pressure with respect to time. Fluid flow equations. Equations that we are going to use mainly based on number one, Darcy equation. After that, diffusivity equation. So Darcy equation, we have two forms here. It depends on the fluid itself, reservoir fluid, either incompressible fluid or compressible fluid. Diffusivity equation, we already presented before how can we derive it, and just decided to bring the final form of the diffusivity equation that ready to be solved. The solution of this equation will be mainly based on the initial condition and the boundary condition. So what you are going to condition in the reservoir at time zero and what you are going to consider at the boundary of the reservoir. These two parameters will identify the solution exactly. The solution in case of slightly compressible. Slightly compressible is either water or oil. These two fluids are under or fit with this slightly compressible fluid. We have two solutions, constant terminal rate and the constant terminal pressure. The constant terminal pressure, just only we use this technique in case of water influx because it can provide cumulative flow at any particular time. However, the one that we are going to consider for the purpose of well test analysis is the second one, constant terminal rate solution. It solves for the pressure change throughout the radial system. We have two forms of this constant terminal rate. It can take two forms. The form number one, E function or line source well. The second form is dimensionless form, where we are using dimensionless variables like dimensionless pressure instead of the real pressure value. This is the first solution, and we have here this expression which represents what we call exponential integral. The solution for this, it takes several steps, but the final form will be like this. This is the final form for the line source well, that here is the bottom hole flowing pressure that can be plotted as a straight line on the semi-log plot versus log t, as you see. This variable of parameters here in front of log t is representing what we call the slope m. From the slope m, all parameters are known except kh product, as highlighted before. There are time definition to set. If you need to examine that this equation is valid or not, you can estimate the time to prove that this equation is valid, that this equation is represent what we call infinite acting radial flow. The second one is the dimensionless pressure. We need to replace pressure as a real value with the dimensionless one. I told you the story of dimensionless start with Darcy equation. This is the normal Darcy equation. Try to rewrite this equation in this form by considering ln Re over Rw in one side and take all the other parameters to the other side. This is the beginning of the story of dimensionless. R over R is dimensionless because this is radius, this is the same, they are the same, that we eliminate the units. So the right hand is without unit. The left hand should also the same, without unit. But if the numerator here is pressure, that means the denominator should be also pressure as well. So pressure over pressure give me dimensionless pressure. This is the dimensionless pressure based on this equation of Darcy. And after that, we identify also the radius itself. The radius, dimensionless radius of the outer boundary will be Re over Rw. And the will bore Re equal Rw, it will be this Y, dimensionless radius will be 1. We have also dimensionless time. So 3 variables now in dimensionless form, because in the log-log plot, we are going to deal with the dimensionless pressure versus dimensionless time. And once you reach to solution, you can easily convert from dimensionless to the real values. This is the final form for the second solution, which will take different forms after that by replacing dimensionless pressure and dimensionless time with the real ones. Now, the first thing that the pressure gauge will feel is what is going on in the wheel-bore storage. This will be the first thing. So wheel-bore storage will have the great impact on the pressure coming from downhole, especially at early time. And after some time, it will be vanished. So at the beginning of that, at the first time, we need to identify the wheel-bore storage and to see what is the impact of it. If we have two wells, well A and well B will be shut in at the wellhead. The other one will be shut in downhole. What we are expecting So despite the fact that the well is shut in, but we still have flowing downhole. The formation is still flowing into the well bore, and this is why the Q at sand face doesn't equal Q at surface. Only Q at surface equals 0, but Q sand face doesn't 0. However, in this case of well A, both of them are 0. So if we are able to conduct the test with shutting the well in from downhole, it will be much more better for us. That will eliminate the impact of well bore storage on the pressure response, and it can save the time as well. Just to explain the previous one, imagine that we have a spring. This is spring, which is liquid, of course, in reality. When you first start production, the first production coming at surface is not coming directly from the formation. It's coming due to the fact of decompression. You see the spring here is, if you release the pressure, open the well to flow, what will happen? The fluid will expand. So the first production coming at surface is coming due to decompression, not from the formation immediately. At surface here, Q is sharp. However, the bottom hole in reality is not sharp. For the build-up, we shut the well in, however, it's still flowing. The reservoir is still delivering, but of course at low rate until it will vanish. As much as the fluid is compressible, it will continue flowing. Less compressible, it will not take time. This is a real comparison between the downhole response in terms of drawdown and in terms of build up. We have two types of well bore storage. The previous one that we highlighted is representing what we call fluid expansion. So we have well bore storage that caused by fluid expansion. The second one is caused by the difference in elevation between the fluid in the annulus and the formation. You know that when you shut the well in or open the well for production, there will be a period that fluid moving up and down until stabilization. This is the equation can represent what we call well bore storage coefficient. It's directly linked to the volume, total well bore volume of fluid in the well bore, and the average compressibility itself. We have two forms. In case of a changing fluid level, it will be like that. In case of fluid expansion, it will be like that. Dimensionless, like pressure, time, and radius, also well bore storage coefficient. It can be also expressed in a form of the dimensionless, because on the log plot, all parameters will be in dimensionless form. The second factor after well bore storage that can affect or we need to evaluate for it if either exists or not is the skin. We have a good example here that two wells. The first well, well A, is producing the same amount of barrels like well B, despite the permeability here is 10 millidarcy, means 10 times of permeability in this reservoir. In place, consider it the same. So now the question, which well has more value if both of them are producing the same amount? Considering this permeability 10 times to this, it means there is something wrong here. How can we identify? By testing the well. The test can identify what's going on. If we have already skin, it will be appear in the form of zone surrounding to the well bore. This zone, we call it damaged zone. The permeability in this damaged zone will not be the same like the permeability in the rest of the reservoir. This can explain why the two wells are producing the same. Why will B doesn't affect and producing at its real potentiality because there is no damage. It could be it has been drilled with underbalanced technique. However, the other one most probably drilled with what we call overbalanced technique. That means pressure in the well bore is greater than the formation pressure. So we are expecting fluid losses. As a result of this, once the test tool can help us by telling us what will happen if we remove this skin. If we remove the skin here, productivity can increase from 100 to be 500. It means 5 times of this well. So a test interpretation can be a good tool to identify which remedial actions need to be taken in the right time to enhance and improve the productivity. Skin can be positive and it can be negative, but they are completely different in this case. Positive means damage, account for damage. However, negative accounts for stimulation, opposite to each other. What can cause this impairment or damage? Many reasons. One of the most important reasons is the overbalance technique during drilling, or perforation job not carried out properly, finds migration due to long production, mainly in the drill stem testing. It used to be like that, or limited entry in terms of partial penetration or partial completion. Stimulation or minus S account for fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, or acidization. Skin is a dimensionless variable, but we use its value to identify how is damaged the reservoir itself in the near vicinity of the well bore. Because of the skin, we have a K sub S, which account for the permeability in the damaged zone. However, K is representing the unaltered zone, the real permeability in the reservoir. This is how can we account for the skin, which is dimensionless. How can we estimate for this skin? We start from always Darcy equation, and just to rewrite it in this form. Take this pressure difference to the left hand and consider the right hand now. This skin, it has been identified as additional pressure drop. Additional pressure drop, that means if BE minus B sub W is the total pressure drop, it means it has to be taken into consideration delta B due to skin. Delta B due to skin should be part from the equation. If this pressure unit and this dimensionless, this will be pressure unit. So delta B skin has to maintain these variables as it is to maintain the equation, the balance of the equation. So what is remaining? Something similar, synonym to this dimensionless radius, which we call it S, skin. So this can be the form of the radial flow, the Darcy equation in radial form, when the case of damaged well. So the equation we started with we can end it with the same equation, but instead of RE over RW only, skin will be part from the equation. Since skin is delta B, consider the fact that we have the ideal case. Ideal case, it means we are expecting if damage or skin is 0, the bottom hole flowing pressure should be at this point. However, in reality, due to skin, the bottom hole flowing pressure is here. So the difference from this to this is accounting for the pressure drop due to skin. So we are not producing at the real potentiality of the well. On the other hand, the delta B on the top, that means the bottom hole flowing pressure is either less than the real one. And this can be equivalent to a bigger well bore radius. Imagine that the well bore radius is greater than R sub W. This can only justify why the productivity will be higher and why delta BS will be negative instead of positive. This geometric skin, it has been already explained before that we need to avoid these two situations to minimize the skin factor as much as we can. Now we move to the major part, which is well-test interpretation. We have two techniques that we are following for our well-test interpretation. The number one approach is the classical approach, which is semi-log. From the name, semi-log, that means we have a plot. Y-axis, Cartesian, x-axis will be in a log format. So, back to the equation. This is the same equation that I told you before, that it is the final form as a solution for diffusivity equation if we consider the dimensionless parameters. A skin is considered in the equation as well. So, solution of diffusivity equation for infinite acting radial flow in a dimensionless form is like that. We can also write it, but considering instead of natural logarithm to be decimal logarithm. It will be in this shape. If we replace the dimensionless pressure and dimensionless time with the real one, the equation will take this new shape, which can be rewritten instead of this K times delta T, we can split both of them from each other by considering only log delta T, okay, and keep the other parameters as they are. This will be the final form that represent the technique of semi-log technique that we are using to identify what we call ERF. ERF, this is standing for infinite acting radial flow. How can we identify it on a semi-log plot? By a straight line, because the relation, this equation is representing what we call a straight line equation. Pressure or pressure change versus log delta T. It's supposed to be a straight line, and this is the slope of the straight line. Semi-log analysis. We use this for well-test interpretation. Why? Because it will help us to identify the straight line, either in drawdown or the build-up. Besides, we can estimate the KH and the skin as well. For simplicity, we choose what we call delta B 1 hour. This is an arbitrary pressure point that will help us to minimize the equation to be solved easily. So at delta T 1 hour, what will happen? Log delta T will be 0. Back to the equation here. Imagine that log delta T at delta T1 will be 0. That means you eliminate this part, and the remaining here will be easily to be solved. The first, in case of drawdown, we call it Miller-Dice-Hutchinson. And this was one of the first techniques that has been considered for well-test interpretation. Still, we can use it until today, despite the fact that we have commercial softwares that can do more and more complicated processes. But what do we have here? This is a slope, M, and this is a straight line. And the first portion here of the real data is not representing a straight line, of course, because this part here is not reflecting the real reservoir response. Here, in the radial flow section, which is a straight line, is representing the response coming straight from the reservoir itself. So we have to take care. No need to account for. Don't consider any slope during this well-bore storage. Only wait until you see the straight line and account and allocate this slope. What about delta B at 1 hour? How can we allocate it? We can't go vertically like this and allocate the point here on this curvature. It will never represent the real pressure point. This is why first estimate the trend and extrapolate it like this. After that, allocate this point on the trend itself, not on the curve. From the slope, we have KH, and take this into this equation again of skin. So now we solve for KH and skin. What about the build-up test? The analysis technique of the build-up require from us either the well is producing from day number 1 or immediately before the build-up is to be at producing a constant rate and even stabilized pressure distribution. So we have to guarantee the stabilization in terms of pressure distribution before the shut-in. So what about the stabilization? Is it easy to be achieved? So imagine that if this stabilization is overlooked or being impossible, the standard analysis techniques may provide, in this case, what we call erroneous information about the formation. To avoid this, we are following the principle, the technique that we call it superposition technique. I will not go deeply in this superposition technique because my colleague in the evening will dive in this in details. Just for the purpose of my slides, I just give you a hint what the superposition is. So in case of it is in reality that reservoir or the well is producing at different rates in the past. However, for the purpose of the radial flow, that is a solution or analytical model, we need a technique that helps us to represent what we call just one scenario with one constant rate equivalent to the real scenario that the well is producing at different rates in the past. I will make it simple for you. Imagine that we have well that was producing at rate QA for certain period of time, and after that it was producing at a another certain value Q sub B. These are two different rates. We can do like that. We can break down this into two. Each one represent infinite acting radial flow equation at constant rate. And if you do like this, consider that the well was producing at this QA and reach to in ARF, reach to the infinite acting radial flow, stabilized, and continue like that. In the other case, the well that start only production at time T2, but at what rate? The difference between QB and QA. So difference both of them in the other scenario will be the rate that the well will be producing at that rate and to continue like that. So what is the benefit in the two scenarios, this one and this one? In two of them, the well is producing at constant rate and even reach to stabilization, infinite acting radial flow. The result, if you superpose this over this, it will give you this exactly. But with this one, we can't use the analytical equations. However, with this one, we will generate two equations. This case will be represented with one equation, and this one will be represented with another equation, and the two equations can be summed together to give solution. This is in a very simple way what superposition technique means. In this case, Horner plot extracted what we call Horner time. In Miller-Dice-Hutchinson, the time was only delta T. However, here it will account for the historical production time, T sub P. So the equation will be solved, and this will be the final form. What about straight line? Is still representing a straight line, is still semi-log, and is still even the slope represented by the same parameters like MDH plot. So we represent the equation, plot it, straight line, estimate the slope, KH, solve it. After that, solve for skin. To solve for skin is the same story. In the previous one, we estimated delta B 1 hour. In this case, move to the plot. In this case, we are going to estimate the slope, but in a different way, that very simple way. Imagine that this is the slope. Extrapolation of the slope is representing P asterisk or P star, is the average reservoir pressure. We said that the well was producing for a period of time at different rates, and the time here, this is what we call superposition time. What about slope? Slope is delta y over delta x. Delta y is the pressure difference. Delta x, to simplify the process, consider always the slope over one log cycle. Why over one log cycle? Because in x-axis, in this case, if it is one log cycle, that means it can be from log 10 to log 100, or from log 100 to log 1000. It depends on the real data we have. So this will be very simple. Log 10, it will be 1. Log 100 will be 2. So you can see here, the final slope will be only the difference between the P1 minus P2. So what do you need exactly? Just only represent the horizontal delta x to be a log cycle exactly. Then delta y will be the same value like m. The process is the same. Once a slope is known, you can estimate KH product. After that, the skin in the same way. The final conclusion for the semi-log process, that we have 4 scenarios that we are anticipated to see. You will face one of them, but you will not see all of them, of course. The first is the ideal response. If you have no wellbore storage, if you have no skin, the pressure response on a semi-log plot, either for drawdown or build up, it has to be the same like you see. However, in reality, either wellbore storage or skin, or both of them, will be there. If we have only wellbore storage without skin, it will be overlapping the ideal scenario. Just only the beginning of the test will be masked. The real pressure response will be masked by what we call a storage effect. However, the rest is still overlapping. So we are anticipating a shift or separation in case of we have skin, because we identified the skin before as a pressure drop, additional pressure drop. This is why the third scenario, in case no storage, but only we have a skin, that means it will be parallel to the ideal one with only delta B pressure difference between both of them. And the last one, which will be the major one that 100% we are going to encounter in reality, that account for both storage and the skin. The black one, sorry, it's typing mistake, is written here no skin, but it's supposed to be both storage and skin together. Now we concluded this approach of semi-log, and oh, sorry, before we conclude, this area always is there. Either we have wellbore storage or we have skin. But why it is there? Because the duration of the test. If the test will stop here, you will not see. It will be already masked with this wellbore storage in the 2 scenarios. So to avoid that losing the entire test, be sure that the duration of the test will be valid enough to overcome the impact of the wellbore storage itself. The second is the modern technique, which we call it tight curves. Instead of semi-log, it will be log-log. Log-log, it's representing the technique of type curves. So what are type curves? Type curves, they are a family of paired of pressure change together with its derivative. Most common type curves, as I highlighted before, they are represented on a log-log plot, but not in a real pressure and real time. It will be represented in dimensionless pressure versus dimensionless time. These type curves will help us to identify the flow regimes that we can encounter in the reservoir, in particular, the pressure derivative. This pressure derivative, we consider it as a diagnostic tool. The million-dollar question is why in these dimensionless variables only have been considered for the type curves? The answer is that using these dimensionless variables will simplify the reservoir model and will provide solutions. These solutions will be independent of units. That means instead of being complicated process is to be simplified process. And after that, to transfer from dimensionless to the real, it will be an easy thing to do. But first you need to interpret the well test in the real way. You need to zoom and focus on the pressure response and how can distinguish between early time, middle time, and late time response. Who is behind that? His name is Bordet. Bordet already provided what we call derivative plot, together with a previous plot that represented by Greengarten. Greengarten already provided log-log plot, but only for the pressure change. What Bordet added is he added the derivative to the same plot. So instead of having this delta B is represented by in the past by Greengarten, and this pressure derivative has been added by Bordet. This derivative, as you see here, is represented like that. If you have Excel, you can either do it, but it's better if you have a software package. It will make it easy for you to estimate the pressure derivative once you have the real pressure data. What is the relationship between derivative and the semilog, and why the derivative is much more valuable than semilog itself? Actually, this derivative is representing the slope of the semilog, and this is why you will notice that it's if you're comparing something that on a Google map, if you look at the map of Ukraine, if you are interested only in the city of Kharkov, you are going to zoom out or zoom in until you achieve your goal. This derivative is the same like zooming in or zooming out. It can help us clearly. It is highly sensitive to any pressure variation. This is why you will see the derivative. So this derivative here, look how it looks, and look for this pressure, how it looks. So we have a very variation here, obvious variation at early time, after that in the middle time, and in the late time. All these variations we cannot catch with delta B only. So together, it can give us a good analytical tool to interpret the real data we have. So if the semilog already composed of 3 major areas, M1 for the early time, M2 for the middle time, and M3 for the late time, the slope at each one of them will be estimated in the form of derivative, and the final log-log plot will be in the same shape as you see. This is the real one, represented by Bordet, I think in 1983. Since that time, the story of well test interpretation, it has been dramatically enhanced. And this log-log plot, we can see that it replaced replaced the semilog 1. We can see here what we call 1.5 log cycle. This 1.5 log cycle is representing the end of the Wilbur storage and the beginning of the real infinite acting radial flow. So why we are saying this? Because if I am using the software to design for a well test, I need to allocate a time or duration for the test. So be sure that if this period here will represent the Wilbur storage, account for this transition period before starting the infinite acting radial flow. So in reality, all this period here is nothing for me, will not give me any information, reliable or accurate information related to the reservoir. So from this time on, we are anticipating to receive valuable information related to the reservoir based on the analysis that we can perform for the pressure data. This is why I'm telling you, I'm reminding you, please take care when you are planning for a test design. Try to think about how long, for how long this Wilbur storage will last, and what do you need exactly from the reservoir. Are you targeting only the reservoir, or you are targeting the boundaries itself? Starting from the Wilbur storage again, Wilbur storage on the log-log plot will be represented as a straight line with a unit slope. Unit slope, that means m equal 1. On the log-log plot, it has been noticed that you see both delta B, which is the pressure change, and the pressure derivative, both of them are overlapping on each other. This is why we can easily identify the Wilbur storage by both of them overlapping. They are equal exactly. You see from this equation here, delta B, the derivative of delta B from the initial equation, the final is to tell us both derivative and the delta B, they are equal. Only here at early time, when the pressure is in a linear relationship with the production rate. If you are using a software, you know very well that the starting process to perform a well test analysis, you need to specify well, reservoir, and outer boundaries. In reality, we have a lot of considerations, a variety of well options, reservoir options, and outer boundary options. This, it depends on the case you have. Based on the case you have, you will select the parameters that represent your case. For the purpose of the initialization of the process of well test analysis, we are going to consider the most simplest scenario, which is the well to be considered as vertical well with no Wilbur storage, no damage, and no stimulation. The reservoir is a homogeneous reservoir, and outer boundary, we don't feel it because we are considering the reservoir is an infinite acting reservoir. This is the translation of this, just to translate this into these graphs or sketch. With this consideration into your mind, what you are expecting from the pressure response. If a vertical perforated along the formation, flow is radial, reservoir is homogeneous, and no boundaries, just only infinite acting. So the pressure response should be like that. Delta B versus derivative and Wilbur storage in a very simple way. And from this radial flow, that this the only flow regime that we can estimate KH from. After that, skin. So the evaluation process like that, always standard process for well test interpretation is to be like that. In reality, we start from the simple consideration, but if the real data is coming, will be more complicated. Of course, you will fine tune the model you will start to modify, but based on what? Based on evidence you have from the real data. We can split the log plot or the type curve into 3 main regions according to time and the pressure response as well. It is early time, which will be near Wilbur, that means it will be affected by Wilbur storage. The middle time region that represent reservoir. This is why skin permeability and reservoir pressure will be estimated from this, from the middle time. Late time region will be highly dominated and affected by the boundaries. Any variation in the reservoir parameters, or we hit a boundary, will dominate the late time region. Flow regimes. We have a list of flow regimes that we are going to encounter, and just I try to highlight it, the major 4 ones. The one that represent Wilbur storage, which is on derivative will be a unit slope. The second is a spherical one, a negative half slope. The radial, which is the major one, that flat, horizontal, 0 slope. And the last one is pseudo steady state or boundary dominated flow, BDF, is a unit slope. So we have if we have unit slope here at late time and unit slope at the early time it's interpretable as Wilbur storage. At late time, if it is like that, that means we are dealing with a closed reservoir. Here we go. This is the same early and the middle and late time with different colors, as you see. And here we have a list of flow regimes that might affect the pressure response at early time, like Wilbur storage, fracture, turbulence, and skin. All these, they have great impact where only at early time. That means once we cross this color from here to here, the impact or effect of this will vanish. And during this middle time, we are expecting any of this to dominate. If the reservoir is homogeneous, infinite acting radial flow, the flow regime will be radial and it will be horizontal, as you see. And the late time, we have a variety here, either to go down with the derivative or to maintain horizontal or to decline upward. Declined upward, it has been said before, that means boundary dominated flow, closed boundary, closed reservoir. However, here is still infinite reservoir. We didn't see any boundary yet. However, derivative to go down sharply like this, only in one case if we are dealing with constant pressure boundary, strong active aquifer. During the transient period, we are going to encounter these two, the Wilbur storage and the radial flow, and in between should be a transition zone. However, in the case of in late time, we are going to encounter all of them together. And as I told you before, if you remember, this black color represents reservoir boundary, or either one boundary or two boundaries or whatever, or a change in reservoir petrophysical parameters, a change from porosity to another porosity, or from permeability to another permeability, and so on. We have some examples for you, just these examples in reality to build up and enrich your knowledge. So what is your expectation in case of I have 3 wells and 3 of them we are expecting Wilbur storage effect, but 3 of them they are not identical. They are not identical. So we have well A, B, and the second well 2 and 3. It seems that the Wilbur storage is increasing toward the right direction. So well 3 is exhibiting a higher well bore storage than well 1. Saying that once you are considering a well-tested design for well 3, it has to be longer than the well-tested design duration for the well number 1. Second, imagine that the end of the test. So you didn't plan to stop the test here. Actually, the well test is supposed to continue. But for any unanticipated reasons, the test was interrupted here exactly. What do you think? Are we still able to consider the well test for getting valuable information related to the reservoir? Yes or no? And if yes, which will exactly? So first, consider the black horizontal line here to see which one of these three curves will still maintain the radial flow period. It seems that only will number 1. The other two, we can't say that we have the real radial flow period that can be represented with this black line, horizontal line. So if the test will be interrupted here, only well number 1 is still valuable and the test can be considered valid. However, 2 and 3 test will be classified as invalid. Another parameter that we can capture from this analytical tool. What do you think if the derivative for the 3 wells are overlapping? However, the pressure change, we have separation. What could be the reason in this case?
Skin.
Skin. Okay, excellent. Skin. Just in a simple way, we said clearly before that skin is an additional pressure drop. That means this, not the derivative one. I'm talking about this one, the pressure change. It's very clear that we have a pressure change. We have a difference. This difference is accounting for delta P. This curves has been generated from the software. Just what I did, I have modified the skin value. Instead of a certain value for this well, I increased it to generate another one. And I invented another value to generate the third one. I overlapped 3 of them together on one plot to see how can I differentiate between both of them. So only in case of skin, you will see derivatives are still the same. However, the pressure change will exhibit a delta B variation. And the last example here, the gap is in both the pressure change and the derivative as well. That means we have shifting. This shift is shifting down. Not only shifting down, and even the radial flow, it has been extended, as you see, stretched horizontally. So the factor that increasing here, I cannot consider it as independent factor. So in case in the model that you have considered skin is constant, you will see this variation in both the pressure change and the derivative as well, moving down. So the higher the permeability, the faster you will feel the pressure response. The lower the permeability, it will take time until you feel the real pressure response. This is why this curve here represents the higher permeability. However, this curve representing the lower permeability. I think now I can come to a conclusion for today that well test is a good tool for us that can help us to identify if we have damage or we don't. If we have damage, that we can perform a remedial action, yes, acidization or fracturing. If the test were performed in case of exploratory well or appraisal well, we know very well what we are expecting. But the advice I need to give you, nowadays, the oil prices, as all of you know, is down, completely down. So this is the best timing for all oil companies to evaluate their own assets in either way. For reservoir engineer and production engineers to focus on well test, If this is the golden time to perform a well test and evaluate and see which well that can be stimulated in either technique to enhance the production process. And no one will be against you when you say that you need to perform a build-up test to account for the average reservoir pressure, because build-up test on my time, I remember that in most of the cases, always oil prices used to be high. So it was very difficult getting approval to conduct a build-up test. Why? Because oil prices is high. How can they accept to shut the well in to conduct a build-up test? This is why I'm telling you guys, this is the golden time to perform a well test with getting approval from your manager without any objection. I hope the idea or my message was delivered in a proper way today. And please, if you have any question in the previous slides, go ahead and ask.
Good afternoon, Dr. Essam. I have a question on where you were talking about the IARF and well-bus storage. Can you please explain again? You were saying that it's after you start the infinite active radio flow, that's when you're able to obtain valuable information going forward, right?
So this, sorry, let me, maybe this one you are talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so I was saying that well-bore storage to where the two lines are overlapping together, delta P and the derivative as well. Okay. After that, they will start to exhibit separation. We have what we call a transition period. This transition period, based on experience, okay, and the industry confirmed it, that we are expecting not less than 1.5 log cycle split between end of well-bore storage and the real beginning of the radial flow. And this, the benefit that you can receive from this, if you are now making a plan for well test. One factor is the timing or duration, how long the build-up will last for. First, you need to see what about well-bore storage and what about transition. So this is a dead time, dead information. We don't receive any valuable information if you stop here at this line here. So you have to consider a longer period of time if you are already anticipating a well-bore storage with a transition period like that. Is it clear, or you still have something?
Yes, you made it clearer. I still have some questions. Okay, from your own personal experience, while testing the well, how long do you spend before you get to the IARF? Like, how long do you spend to deal with like the well-bore storage effect and all this, like from this graph? Like before you get to this line, the line at the start of the radial flow?
When I presented the first slide of the well test description, I said it is identical plot, that standard one. So in my life, we have conducted a series of well tests. So always, let us say that it is between minimum 1 day up to maximum still less than 2 days. So in general, in total, it should be less than 2 days. But considering all this together, I'm talking about a well test that we are going to conduct for a new well in exploratory area or appraisal well. However, for periodic well test analysis, okay, the well already is flowing on production. What you are going to do, just shut the well in, which will last, let us say that maximum, it will be 12 hours. Maximum.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And also, I forgot to ask you. In my case, we used to have a smart completion. With this smart completion, we have a permanent downhole gauge. So in reality, if there was any shutdown, there used to be shutdown for any other reason, not for build up, any period, any opportunity for shutdown, and I have a permanent downhole gauge, I consider this my build up, and immediately we analyze it. So I don't know in your case, what about the downhole gauge? Do you have a permanent downhole gauge or what?
Understand. All right. Can you please also elaborate on when you're talking about constant terminal rate solution and then the constant terminal pressure solution?
Okay. So, yes. Okay. So the constant terminal rate pressure, it has not been discussed in terms of well test analysis because it is not accounting for pressure change. It just accounts for cumulative flow at any particular time in the reservoir, with keeping in mind that one of the boundaries is constant pressure. That means aquifer. So they are using this technique just only in water influx modeling. However, the solution that has been considered for diffusivity equation, we call it constant terminal rate. What is the concept, basic concept? It solves the diffusivity equation with keeping in mind that our target is to account for the pressure change throughout the radial system, providing that the flow rate is held constant. So these are assumptions for analytical model. Mathematically, if you don't meet these assumptions, you cannot use this analytical model. This is why, in case of Horner, he used what we call superposition time. Why? To overcome the problem that the well was on production at several or various rates in history, in its history. So, however, the analytical model is saying that the well should be on production at constant rate. This is the issue.
Okay. All right, and then my final question. I don't know why it's a dumb question. I'm just going to ask it. You were saying when you get the radial flow, that's when you know whether you're trying to target the well test for the reservoir or for the boundary limits, right?
The reservoir. I'm saying reservoir. Radial is representing reservoir.
Okay, for the reservoir.
Yes.
Ah, okay, okay. All right. Thank you.
Same to you.
Hi, Sam. I have a question. You mentioned that the whole duration of the cleanup and build up is 2 days, right?
I said in case of exploratory well, I'm expecting the well test as presented here. It can last for less than 2 days. Less than 2 days.
Okay, so in this case, what are the expected permeabilities or KH? Because the whole idea of the main buildup is to really investigate the drainage area or reach the boundary.
I got your point. I got your point. In case of exploratory well, you are not sure exactly about the permeability. So this is why when you design for a well test, let us say that it has been planned to be 2 days. Why I said drill stem test was eliminated and now we are conducting the test without drill stem, because today we have SRO gauge. This SRO gauge, I am receiving the pressure point on time. So I have my software, I am following and analyzing and interpreting on time. If I feel that I didn't achieve my goal and still radial flow didn't reach it, because still most of the time it already masked with wellbore storage. Most of the time we have wellbore storage and transition period. This is why I'm telling you, it depends on what facilities do you have. If I can monitor and analyze on time, I can decide on time either to shorten the well test period or to extend it further.
Okay, thanks. Because, well, by the way, I'm from Schlumberger, so I'm also doing the, well, I used to do the well test planning. And maybe you know that in Petrel there is a special plugin called geotesting. that allows you to design the well test based on the heterogeneous 3D reservoir model that you have.
Yes, I agree with you. Yes, I'm using the same, but not the same tool. I'm using, maybe I used to use Sapphire, okay, software. So the basic concept is the same, but you design the test, but on location, you need to monitor, okay, on time, because what you designed for is valid based on assumptions you have considered in your model. It can be not 100% the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with you. And this is actually the main limitation of the classical well test interpretation, because since it's a reverse mathematical problem, you can match it basically to anything. You need to have a very good geological initial concept to which you would like to match your well test.
Exactly, exactly.
Because otherwise you can get anything. You can, even in a single porosity model, you can reinterpret it as a dual porosity.
It happened. Of course,
Yeah.
It is not clear, okay, the process is not easy. But again, I said, this derivative is helping us acting the same way, like zooming in and out when you are opening Google Map, looking for a Kharkov city, okay, in Ukraine, for example. Okay, so this is a benefit that we can getting from the derivative, is to identify how can we interpret.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's the step forward in well test interpretation techniques.
So, are you here in Ukraine?
No, I'm in Germany.
Germany, okay. So, I was about to ask you if you are conducting a test, will test here. So, I was wondering.
No, I was not designing well tests here, only interpreting them.
Okay, so you are welcome. I hope Germany is safe in terms of coronavirus now.
Who knows? Who knows? We stay at home.
You are under quarantine?
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
Work from home.
Okay.
And you're in Ukraine, or where are you based?
Yes, in Ukraine. I need to go home, but I am contained here in Ukraine.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for you. I please feel free, if anybody else still need to ask a question, please feel free and ask.
Okay, Sam, thank you for your presentation. I actually have one question. In real life, we have from time to time a lot of noises in pressure measurement. So what methods do you prefer to use to reduce the noises after the measurement, actually?
First of all, remember that when we said that we need to see the report that used to come with the test data in terms of time, I need to be sure that I have interpretation or justification, real meaning for any anomalies we have in terms of pressure, because I need to distinguish if the noisy and the pressure is coming from something related to the reservoir or coming from something happened at surface or in the wellbore. So number one is human errors. Be sure that to go through the report, okay, check the time and duration and compare this with the pressure anomalies you have. Once you eliminate this, back to the pressure points. In the well test in the well test package, okay, we have options that we can I forgot the name exactly, but we can reduce this noisy, like you said, without affecting the major trend. So try to have a look for the curve from far away, zooming in, zooming out. So be sure, don't remove some anomalies that can be reflecting to the reservoir. This is coming and based on your experience, your judgment. You understand your reservoir, you have the input database related to the well. You can imagine, so what was the real response? Try to even to create a scenario that if this, the parameters, what could be the outcome, and compare this with this. You can find the reasons. that can help you to better identify these anomalies is coming from where exactly.
Yeah, just to add to Essam, if you see that your data is very noisy, you can try to normalize them. There are a number of techniques, and the modern software allows you to do it.
Yes, this is what I'm saying, but okay, exactly. So again, normalize it without losing, okay, the real meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it was a question, because insofar as there are instruments to normalize the data, but still we can lose some meaningful points using it.
I am afraid that maybe your points may be affected by more than one flow regime, and this is why it is the plot itself. Do you see the plot itself is clear that like the standard one or completely different? If you plot the type curve, pressure and the derivative, can you see it clearly or you can't?
Actually, we can't.
This is what I'm saying. So because our understanding at the beginning that you can see the typical type curve as we see now, just only with some pressure noisy, that you can eliminate this with the technique of normalization. However, if you can't see the normal curve, normal shape itself, that means you have something that you need to identify the basic input to see will vertical or not vertical, damaged or not damaged, will pore storage, and the reservoir. It is dual porosity, single porosity. You have a lot of variety in the model. Try to test until you reach to a match.
Okay, thanks.
Same to you.
Okay, guys, I have to interrupt you. If you finish with the questions, we have to go to another platform, because in 15 minutes our next lecture will start, and we need to check the sounds and communication with them. Sorry for interruption. It was good, and thank you very much, Essam.
Same to you. Thanks for you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.